replacing part of the brain with a computer, which was sort of insane.
Yeah.
Um, if we're just talking about like prosthetic limbs, I mean that's not too bad unless you're talking about like fucking like Winter Soldier or Cyber Run, like super strength on your arm shit. In which case, that's not happening.
Right. Well, that's the thing, though. That is what we're talking about because the
Oh boy.
yeah. So now you get it. Now you get it. So before we begin, though, yeah, just give us your qualifications and whatnot.
So I'm in astrophysics, and most of the research that I've actually been involved in has actually related to climate change, surprisingly.
Right.
Um, so I am pursuing my master's, should hopefully have that in the next couple of years. Um, with what I'm lending to this, it's basically um, understanding the physical constraints behind, why some of these super cyber limbs just aren't really gonna work the way that people are imagining.
Right.
And at least the impression I have in mind from what you've described to me and from some of what I've seen, people are imagining that they can chop off the arm and replace it with like some weird, I mean, not necessarily vibranium, but replace it with enhanced prosthetic that will allow them to have some sort of super strength or just somehow harness, you know, this greater mechanical engineering, whatever it is that they're imagining that they could do with an arm. And I've sent you a bit of information on that. It's not my field, but they're basically what I handed you was some of what I looked up and some of what other people have thrown at me when I asked them about it. We do have the technology to actually have, well, I should say we do have the technology. It's actually very new. These advances have come in just the past few years where we've actually been able to successfully implant electrodes in the brain and actually have, I think, up to 7 or 9 degrees of movement in an arm. So that's like, that's enough to like rotate a shoulder and the wrist and open and close the hand. It's amazing, don't get me wrong. It's a lot that we can do, but it's nowhere near what people are imagining. But even then, even if we take this to its full course and you can you can get full articulation in the arm that you can replace it with, you cannot, I mean, like physically cannot just chop off your arm and slap on a super high density, ultra strength enhancing arm. That doesn't work for a lot of the same reasons that I mentioned before. There are other videos that cover a similar subject where they talk about the practicality of super strength as a superpower and how just the differences in weight, mass, and density just don't really math out. You're gonna need more than just super strength for someone with super strength to actually function. If you want to graft on, we're talking like, well, even if it's not like a really heavy arm, let's just imagine, for sake of argument, that we have a relatively, say, light enough arm with,
Right.
say, hydraulics and all that stuff. You can't just like chop off your arm and then slap on a replacement like that. That's not how it works. You're actually going to need to hit the gym one way or another, because you're going to have to strengthen up all the muscles that prosthetic is going to be attached to.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So, and even then, the strength of that arm isn't going to necessarily be much better than what you can already manage. Like if you're talking about like crushing beer cans or, you know, like breaking.
We're gonna get to that actually. We're gonna get to that actually because I'm gonna talk about some other problems regarding this idea of robotic arms and whatnot, and why they're probably not going to be superhumanly strong anyway. But first of all, one thing that I was thinking of, and you actually brought it up another time we talked about this, although we tried to record it, but for some reason it didn't pick up your audio that time, which is why we have to do this again. But we also talked about something called center of mass, and a lot of these people who think, you know, who talk about these robotic limbs and whatnot and having a robotic arm and whatnot, they don't seem to realize that the further away something is, and your arms are literally as far away on your body as they can come from the center of your mass, right? The heavier it's going to appear to you. Meaning that if you take like a very heavy weight, let's take like a 50-pound weight, and you hold it right to your chest, it's probably not going to feel that heavy. I mean, it's going to be a bit of a workout, but you can actually pretty much manage it. But there's a reason why mostly just strength athletes can take such a weight and have their arms folded out fully, you know, extended in front of them and holding that same weight for more than maybe a few seconds straight out. You know what I mean? And that's because it's because the center of mass, you know. And one thing that you brought up, which is a very good point, is that if you take Will Smith, for instance, from iRobot, like he, you know, in the movie, he can like walk around just normal, and it's like this metallic arm, and like when you actually do see the arm that he has, and it's covered in like real skin, so it's kind of like a Terminator situation, but it's actually a robotic arm beneath, and that fucker is solid. And the thing is that, you know, sure, I don't know if they ever explained it in the movie or not, but the idea is that, oh, well, it's a super light metallic alloy and whatnot. But what people need to understand, though, is like even the lightest metallic alloy, and I'm a chemistry student here, so I actually know this stuff. Even the lightest alloys we create will still be, proportionally speaking, heavier than your bone mass. You know, it's not going to be, it's never actually going to be light enough ever where it's going to feel just like a normal arm. So what would actually happen in iRobot is, unless they gave him like a super strong back as well, or you know, which extended to the hips and the thighs and the legs even, look, he would be crooked, you know?
Yeah, that's actually somewhat interesting points. I remember, if I remember properly, he went down to part of his rib cage. If I remember, it wasn't just his arm; it actually replaced part of his torso, which is actually more appropriate. I mean, even if you're just replacing your arm, you know, you're not just replacing your arm. You're going to have to, you know, support. You're gonna have to extend that support somehow. You're gonna have to, like you mentioned, your spine, part of your torso. Then yeah, down to your limbs. I mean, there's really no way to just do that. That's why exosuits exist.
Right? Yeah, we're gonna get to that too. But yeah, the point I'm making though is, and again, this is just basic physics. You don't need to be a fucking physicist to understand this. If you were to, you know, get your arm chopped off and you just had like a fucking metallic arm put on, and even if it was a, you know, very lightweight metallic arm, if you wanted to actually be strong enough to be as durable as in the movies and whatnot, and most transhumanists, they would like this because they have like this delusional idea of, you know, superhuman abilities and whatnot from these robotic limbs. Well, even if it's a super lightweight metallic alloy, it's still never going to be as light as the bone mass that you're essentially replacing, meaning that it's still going to be heavier regardless than a normal arm, and you will feel it unless you do some extensive surgery to also extend into your other limbs and parts of your body to sort of neutralize that extra weight in one direction. Because otherwise what's going to happen is, well, you're going to develop a forced scoliosis situation where your spine is literally going to become an S shape over time, because you're going to have to fucking exert yourself all the fucking time just to stand up straight. You're going to have a slumped shoulder, basically. It's just not going to work. And
if they don't, oh, go on. Sorry.
No, and then you also have the other problem in all of this. Well, all of a sudden, this surgical procedure to give you a robotic limb, all of a sudden it becomes far more invasive than it really should be. And, you know, some people are probably watching this right now and thinking, well, hold on. They're already giving people robotic limbs and whatnot. What you're saying can't be true. Well, here's the thing, though. Those robotic limbs are, comparatively speaking, to what you're seeing in the movies, they're very weak, right? They're just strong enough to do basic things in your everyday life that you want to be able to do, you know? And that's because the material has to be light enough that it feels kind of like a regular arm. If you ever hold like you know, a common metallic, a common arm prosthesis, which I have done. I actually have I've actually had a few, had the opportunity to hold one of them, and I feel it, and it's already, they're kind of, some of them are actually a bit heavier than a regular arm already. But basically they're made out of material that's light enough, and that's really what they're going by for the most part when they make prosthesis, like what's light enough not to be a bother. And they're just strong enough to be able to handle everyday usage. But yeah, if you want the arm that can like crack fucking walnuts and shit, it's gonna have to be made out of a metallic alloy. And most arm prostheses don't have that many metallic parts, actually. And that's, again, because of the weight issue.
Parts to reduce weight. But even then, you're going to have to involve a whole hydraulic system.
Oh, yeah. That's another issue. And then we get into the other issue here. And that's, okay, let's scrap the science of this, okay? Let's just say that, okay, center of mass wasn't an issue, all right? Let's just say that somehow they managed to make this arm just light enough. You know, it's magic essentially, but fuck it. It's light enough that it doesn't actually weigh more than a regular arm, but it's still strong enough to crack fucking walnuts and shit. Well, now we get into the actual pragmatic issue. It's not even about science anymore, but now we get into the pragmatic issue of this, which a lot of transhumanists don't seem to understand. Do you honestly think that any sensible government is just gonna let you have such a powerful fucking arm, all right, and not nerf that shit to allow the civilian population to use it? If you really think that, you're fucking dumb. Like, there's no fucking way any sensible government is just gonna let people have these metallic robotic arms that, you know, okay, again, let's say that they are super light and they feel just like a real arm, but they're just super strong as well. That's not going to happen.
Power limbs do exist, and limbs with hydraulics do exist, but they don't, at least within our current constraints, they don't necessarily have the power or any of these, like, you know, stopping Captain America's shield-like abilities that we're talking about. They aren't necessarily too much stronger than, you know, people. And the thing, the kicker with all this, at least on my end, is that you're going to require, you know, training in order to use any of these limbs. I mean, you can't just up and attach an arm to some, you know, fucking couch surfing sloth. You know, you can't just, you know, cheat around having to develop yourself by getting a robotic limb. It doesn't work like that, because the parts that you're attaching that limb to need to be developed. So you're going to have to train and be fit, and you're gonna have to, it's like one way or another, you're not going to avoid, you know, putting some work into improving yourself, either to just become naturally strong or to just become strong enough where you can actually get a limb attached onto you safely. In which case, why not just fucking go to the gym, guy?
Right. And then we actually get into the next point when you're saying this, and it's the fact that, well, within a not too distant future, robotic limbs are not even really going to be needed. This is something that a lot of these transhumanists don't even seem to really think about. Well, in a world where you could actually grow new limbs, either in a laboratory and then surgically attach them, and then, you know, with physical therapy you would eventually get back it would be like your old arm again, literally, because it's your fucking DNA. But or even, you know, there's even some ideas, and it's looking like it could actually be realistic. You could actually take the area that's been mutilated, and you can actually put it into a vat. So let's say that your arm was chopped off from your shoulder. Well, you attach an attraction that has a fluid that's very similar to the fetal fluid in the uterus, and the idea is that you're going to try and fool the cells to think that you're back in a fetal stage. And you know, hypothetically, you could actually regrow your arm, and I mean, it's not going to be, you know, like the old thing. You would still have to do physical therapy to train it back in it, but eventually, yeah, you would have, after maybe half a year, it would be basically your old arm back, and it would be like normal. And this is the thing: when you have that technology, which is actually going to be around sooner than people may realize, there's no need for robotic limbs.
Depends on the cost, I suppose.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. You know, well, I'm sorry to say this to someone who lives in the U.S., which is the only nation in the, you know, developed world that doesn't have universal health care, but most nations do.
It's only going to get worse, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing, yeah, but that's the thing, though. I mean, this is intended for people who have been in accidents, and even idiots who willingly chop off their arms because they want a robotic arm. They're such a small part of the population anyway, it doesn't really matter. So when it comes to this minority of people who may actually need this, yeah, there shouldn't be a reason why they couldn't get this sort of treatment through the universal healthcare system anyway in nations where it is. But that is actually an option, and honestly, the vast majority of people are probably going to prefer this over some kind of robotic part anyway. And so there's really, at that point, when this technology is around, why the fuck would the government even bother essentially paying for your robotic arm when they might as well just rationalize, you know what, we might as well just grow you a fucking new arm, because that's going to be more functional anyway when you rejoin the workforce, you know, whatever. So, you know, fuck it, we're gonna pay for you to have a new biological arm, or there's gonna be nothing.
The case I'm thinking of right now, the runner. There was a runner who had a special set of prosthetic legs that actually made him, you know, better. It actually gave him an advantage in running versus other people.
Oh yeah, but because over time the potential energy built up in his prosthetic legs.
Right, because when you look at the physics of how running works, the metal in his legs is actually more efficient at absorbing, redirecting energy, and absorbing shock and all that, which is great and all, but like, that guy can't, you know, rotate his fucking ankle or wiggle his toes or anything, right? He doesn't have any actual, you know, sensation in those prosthetic legs, and actually trying to enhance his legs to, you know, to do that is going to, you know, reduce the function, the sort of one-trick pony function that they have for him as a runner. He would need a different set of legs between running or, you know, living or doing anything else. It's weird to describe.
Right. I mean, I've actually seen
so many ways to...
I've actually seen interviews with that guy, and what's interesting is, you know, it's like you said with these prosthetic legs, because they're intended for one purpose, you know, allowing him to run. Yeah, technically over a certain distance he can run faster than any human normally can, thanks to these prosthetic legs. But the interesting thing is, when they wanted to interview him, and he wasn't allowed to really sit down because it was right after he had been running, so he was forced to essentially do the interview standing up. And the thing is, right, like, he can't stand still. He has to keep moving his legs a little bit because he can't keep the balance on those prosthetics if he stands still, you know. So he has to, like, it looks like he's dancing samba, you know, while he's doing the interview, but it's literally just something he has to do so he doesn't fall over, you know. And that's one of those obvious limitations of this sort of technology. Like, yes, and the thing is, what transhumanists don't seem to realize is the human body in general has evolved to be very utilitarian. Like, when you look at pure skills physically, we are not very impressive creatures at all. We are not especially strong or fast or even tactile or anything like that if you compare to other animals that have specialized, but that's the key word, specialized in any of these areas. However, one thing that has given us a huge advantage is that we're good enough at most things when it comes to this.
We're versatile and adaptable. I mean, the big deal with us is that we can adapt really well as opposed to others that can't do it as well.
Right, yeah, so we are not very good at a specific physical task compared to most animals who are adapted to that physical task. So, I mean, for instance, when it comes to tactile sensation, we're pretty shit if you compare to, like, a fucking shrimp, for instance, you know, who has some of the most sensitive tactile senses, I believe. However, we are at the same time still pretty fucking good at tactile sensation. We can actually feel, and it's been proven, I believe, that we can actually feel something down to like 13 nanometers or so. If we really focus on it. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, that is. Like, I didn't know that, but apparently that's the case. But it's interesting. But what the point is, the reason we humans function so well in our general everyday life and why we have even been able to adapt to most environments on the planet except for the very hottest and the very coldest, that is. The only reason that's possible is it's not just our intelligence, of course, but it's also that physically, generally speaking, when it comes to most physical, forms of traits, we are fairly good. Like, we're not really great at any of them if you compare to most animals, but we are good enough at all of them that, generally speaking, we have the other animals beat for most part. You know?
God, I'm imagining some like sweatshop in China or somewhere where some of the workers have their limbs amputated and replaced with like these weird prosthetics that make them better at whatever menial tasks that they're doing, so that they don't get fucking arthritis or something, and they can make them work for longer.
Right? Yeah. But yeah, that's the thing. And any prosthetic,
oh, what a nightmare.
Any prosthetic that you're gonna get, yeah, I mean, if it's specially designed, sure, you might be able to compete any human trying to do that with their normal limbs, but when it comes to general tasks overall, it's probably going to be inferior, and quite a lot inferior. The point is rather that, no, robotic limbs are probably never going to become commonplace, and they're probably not even going to be, technically speaking, needed. So the idea that, you know, you will have robo-sapiens in the future is kind of ridiculous, in my opinion, and that's really what seems to be the case as well when you look at the scientific evidence of this. And now we get to the final point, really, and this is the kicker. Because there is actually a way that any transhumanist who fantasizes about having superhuman strength and whatnot, that can actually be achieved. And you know what? You don't need to chop off any of your limbs to do that. Because there's something like, you know, like we talked about before, there's something called an exosuit. So if you really want to be able to do all of these superhuman feats and whatnot, yeah, don't chop off your limbs. You don't need a robotic arm or robotic leg to do that. You can just put on an exosuit that's actually, a prototype is actually being developed right now by the US military. And the technique is actually going forward surprisingly fast. They're already starting to do some trials with this stuff, and there are already prototypes that are used by certain companies for certain tasks. that are actually very useful.
We have some exosuits or something close to it and some very niche commercial use right now, but yeah, exosuits have been a thing for a while. I think there's even was there a COD game that was based around having some shooter that played around with it based off of concept designs for that. What I wanted to get into, that's right, I lost my train of thought earlier. Wanting to go into the specifics about limbs and strength and whatnot. When talking about augmented strength in these limbs, I sort of tunnel vision. I kept thinking about like grip strength, like, you know, having some hydraulics in there so you can crush something really tightly and, you know, like, you know, do some shit that you could probably just train yourself to do or put on a glove and do just as easily. But if you're going to think about, like, say, lifting something heavy or like punching someone extra hard or something, then God, it all comes back together. I mean, first off, the amount of force you can throw behind your punch is directly proportional to your mass. So but more than anything else, if you want your arm to hit heavier, whatever it's made out of, it's gonna have to be heavier. Which means that if you want to have a heavier arm, you need a heavier support for it. So you're gonna have to be, you know, you have to be stronger for it. I'd encourage. Well, I mean, you have sources. I'm sure there's other videos and stuff on it,
right?
Related to. I mean, if you want to put a heavier or stronger prosthetic limb on, you're gonna have to train yourself for it because your body needs to be able to support it. And this leads back into why exosuits are just an easier route to go with this. Better to just get a lighter prosthetic and put on an exosuit, as opposed to all the work that would be involved in having to put on a heavier arm, which is just, I mean, it is so much easier to just go to the fucking gym for a couple of months and get some better arms, as opposed to chopping your arm off and then having to go through years of therapy and then hitting the gym again anyways, and then the amount of training involved in having to react. I mean, there's no way to I don't imagine that there's going to be a faster way to go over that element of getting a new prosthetic limb. I mentioned it briefly in that big spiel I threw to you earlier, but that was all actually based off of the experiences of quadriplegic people that they restored limited functionality to. Because like when you lose your arm, your brain actually rewires itself to become more efficient because it doesn't need a lot of the resources that were dedicated to that arm. So when you get your arm back, you know, when they plug in those, they map out your brain, they plug in the neurons that sort of correspond to the nerve endings that are left over there. Then they slap on the arm and they put on a little computer that will interpret signals, and you have to retrain yourself. I mean, there is a whole mess of, I mean, not just physical trauma, like mental trauma. I mean, not only does your body have to train itself, you know, with having to deal with, you know, foreign object attached to it and with rejection and all that, which is, you know, a whole different conversation in itself in terms of how messy it gets. But there's also you having to it's like mental exercises. It's like it's literally overcoming a trauma in terms of trying to force your brain into rethinking in the way that involves having an arm again. It's difficult to describe, you know, to the people that write about it, because they're just translating from the experiences of, you know, people that are trying to have their limbs back again. There isn't an easy way to translate that experience from one medium to another, never mind, you know, third hand that I'm explaining it to you here. So, I mean, even presuming that all the other technology is in place to give somebody a limb, you know, very easily, very accessibly, I do not know if there's a way to just like rapid fire, someone through physical and mental therapy. I mean, the psychological element behind it is daunting. I mean, at least for me, when I read about what these people go through, I mean that for me personally is what completely threw me off the idea of even humoring something like this. That is not something like, because it relates to some of the audience. Oh, excuse me, sorry. It throws me back to some of the injuries I dealt with when I came out of service, and it's
right.
like, oh fuck no, I'm not doing that again. Fuck no, thank you. It's but I don't think that a lot of people that imagine these things, in the terms of sci-fi and whatnot, are thinking about it at that level.
Could it be that science fiction is just that, fiction?